Hi there. Welcome to the From Lab to Launch podcast by Qualio, where we share inspiring stories from the people on the front lines of life sciences. Tune in and leave inspired to bring your life-saving products to the world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to From Lab to Launch by Qualio. I'm Kelly from Qualio, and I'm your host today. We're glad you're here. Before we jump in, just a reminder to please rate the show and share it with any of your science nerd friends. We know you have some. Also, check out the show notes if you have a story or product you would like to share with us. We're grateful for all the interest this podcast has had lately. Today, we've got Dr. Shah, Chief Medical Officer from Aktiia, with us. Dr. Shah is a seasoned physician leader with over 15 years of progressive and diverse experience in the medical field. He has worked in various academic, clinical, and teaching environments, as well as building medical businesses and service lines. As the Chief Medical Officer of Aktiia, he's part of a transformative company that empowers providers and patients to greatly improve the diagnosis, monitoring, and treatment of hypertension, which affects almost half of all American adults and over 1 billion people globally. Let's jump into how they're addressing this massive problem in public health. Thanks for joining us today, Jay. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks very much for having me, Kelly. I appreciate it. Good to be here.
All right. Well, to get us started, tell us a little bit about your background and how that landed you at Aktiia.
Sure. Well, I started like I think a lot of doctors, I sort of grew up imagining wanting to be a doctor and then ended up going to medical school at the University of Missouri in Kansas City, which is like a city general hospital. So, you know, as far away from my, relatively tame upbringing that you could get, I think places like Compton or South Central LA or Southside Chicago. This was like sort of the environment, which was an amazing place to be a medical student, by the way, because you had a lot of responsibility because they were so, chronically understaffed. Um, After doing that, I ended up getting a residency spot through luck or chance, and or hard work at Massachusetts General Hospital and Boston. And so there, it was a completely different view of medicine, and my lens was so much broadened by my colleagues in my residency class. I was, the senior resident, and my junior resident was, let's say, someone who had run a WHO, funded NGO in Africa for the last 5 years. And another
Wow.
one would have been someone who had developed some molecule and sold it to some pharmaceutical company and was on the fast track to being sort of the leader of one of the global pharmaceutical companies in the world. And so these were the sort of counterparts I was with. And so that was an amazing experience. I did my general cardiology fellowship at Washington University in St. Louis, which is a tremendously academic but huge hospital, over 1,100 beds with like a 8-state catchment area. So it's an incredibly rich clinical experience. I really learned how to sort of be a really good and thorough clinical, cardiologist. And then after doing all those sort of things at these academic places, I ended up going out, and after fellowship, I went and started my own practice from scratch, just me and a medical assistant and 2 EKG machines. So
Wow.
there, I learned about all the business aspects of starting a medical practice, negotiating equipment purchases and cost effective analyses and par level for, syringes and, machines and all kinds of software. And so I set that up and grew that into a very busy practice, which was totally different, but great experience. And then for the last 3 years, I've been the medical director at Mayo Clinic, and I started a program for aortic diseases. So looking at people who had aortic aneurysms and kind of treating them in a very, advanced way. So sort of a very diverse clinical experience and academic experience and training. But then that led me to a place where over the last couple of years, I started thinking, well, how could I now take all this knowledge and experience in real world clinical practice and apply it in a different way, maybe in a broader way to help more than just one patient at a time, but to help, have a broader impact. And so that led me to sort of a search of a number of things, but a very exploratory process. And it ended up leading me down the road of looking at medical device or med tech startups, digital health startups, and, just by chance really stumbled upon Aktiia and have now been with the company over a year and a half as the chief medical officer. So that was sort of my journey in less than 5 minutes.
Nice, nice. I love though that you're bringing such a broad base of experience to a medical device setting though that feels like such a good uh a great benefit to the company and to the patients for sure. So what as you explored Actia and their wearable blood pressure monitoring devices, what drew you to that? What makes that innovative in your opinion?
I mean, coming from a background of a clinical cardiologist, I am generally taking care of patients that have had some event or having some symptoms of some problem, a heart attack or a stroke or heart failure or arrhythmias or, any number of cardiac problems. Um, and almost always after we take care of the urgent issue and they come back to my office and they sit there and they'll say like, okay, doc, why did I have this? I try to eat well, I try to exercise, I try not to do what I'm not supposed to do, but why did I have this? And almost always the answer is there's not usually just one thing, but there was probably a confluence of many things that have gone on for probably decades before your event happened, that many of which are modifiable. And the most common of which and the most impactful of which is high blood pressure or hypertension. And so, as you kind of mentioned in the intro, I mean, hypertension it's the most common chronic disease worldwide, period, by far. And despite lots of knowledge about how to treat it, lots of cheap medications, we have existing blood pressure machines. Despite all those things, the global control rates for hypertension is 20%. That means only 20% of people who have the disease actually are treated well and treated to target control rates. In the US, it's not much different. It's 26%.
Hmm.
So, despite all that knowledge and all these things that are relatively widely available, cheap, and effective, we're really bad at it. We're really bad at managing hypertension on a broad population level. So, the idea with Actia, or one of the many sort of um, gaps that we try to, fill and what we think about is that how can we bring a a product slash device, but really it's a product to the market that enables and empowers people that to allow them to be more aware, allow them to be more educated about high blood pressure, allow them to be more personalized about their interactivity, their interaction with their own health that allows them to then hopefully live a better, happier, healthier life. And for them not to sit in my office one day saying, how did this happen to me?
How did this happen? Yeah, how
Yeah.
did we get here? Well, and that leads very nicely into my next question about wearables in general. Feels like, that's definitely putting some power back in the hands of, Joe general public, right? To
Right.
kind of monitor
Right.
our own. And so I guess how are you seeing that change the healthcare industry, like recent years, but then going forward? You think we'll see more and more of that? How do you see that changing?
I think I'll answer the second question first. I think, yes, we're going to see more and more of it. I mean, the genie's way out of the bottle. There's no way to put it back in.
Yeah.
And so and it's a trick because it's a tricky thing because most wearables are not medical devices. They are not regulated. They are not tested. They are not validated. Most of them aren't. So while they do sort of dabble, play, imply that they have health benefits or say that there's some health application, there's a significant amount of caution, and I think distrust is probably too strong of a word, but essentially that's what it is, from the medical community at looking at data from those devices. So, cardiologists. So people come in and they say, "Oh, well, my this watch or this device says this or that, or don't you think I need to look at something?" And you look at the data behind it, and there's almost, generally speaking, there's very very little data to support, very little evidence to support using that data for medical decision making. So one of the difference with Actia is that we have gone down a very rigorous and stringent sort of regulatory pathway, proving the science behind our technology and going through the regulatory steps to make it a class 2 medical device, which is what it is. And so I think that's a conundrum that digital health med tech, wearables and other companies have to be honest with themselves about is that if they really want to make a difference to healthcare, they will have to engage with regulatory bodies to be able to gain trust with, providers and medical system in general. So I think that's sort of the second answer. But the first answer is sort of you know, where are we going with this wearable story? And the truth is, I don't think most of us have much of an idea. Um, I think that this is where at sort of an inflection point where these devices are going to be more and more available to people. And as you mentioned, really putting patients from a medical term, but people in charge of their health. People don't come to see me as a physician because they want some procedure or they want some test or they want something done. That's not generally why people show up in the office.
Mhm.
They're showing up because they want knowledge. That is the true thing that people are seeking when they go to a specialist or a physician's office. They want knowledge. I have this problem, or I think I have this problem. Give me the knowledge to help me decide how best to go forward with my own healthcare. And that is the true potential power of digital health, is giving that knowledge to people, irrespective of where you are in the world, of how much money you have, of how much access to care you have, because the technology will far outstrip healthcare systems' ability to be widely available. And so that sort of near ubiquitous, source of knowledge, internet, devices, connected devices, et cetera, it's really trying to bring that expert medical knowledge to the world. And that's really the potential power of digital health. Um, and then, of course, it's all in the details about how that actually happens. If it
Sure,
happens,
sure.
yeah.
Definitely, definitely. Well, and it's interesting, I mean, you're a physician who's trying to solve a problem with a medical device, and honestly, that's a very common path for medical device innovation and those kinds of things. But as you were talking about, it feels like we're still maybe early in that tipping point of people really starting to trust the digital transformation of healthcare and how you know can we dive into that a little bit more? Because, obviously yourself, like you're seeing a great opportunity here and a need and a way to put that power back in the patient's hands. But then there's resistance maybe on the doctors, as you were talking about, they don't trust the data, right? How do we keep moving that forward? How do you see physicians leading this digital transformation in the healthcare space?
I think patients are going to lead it. I don't think physicians are going to be the primary leaders of it. They'll help.
Interesting.
They will support. They will be there. They will provide their input and they'll provide their expertise and their knowledge in the ways that they can and they're able to. But um, I think that patients are the ones who want this at this point in time, want this more. They are the one, not they. There's not really, all providers are patients too.
Right,
Everybody
right,
got to say.
right.
So, the thing is that medical systems are designed in a very reactive way, right? You go when there's a problem, generally speaking. 75% of all healthcare dollars in the US are spent on, reactions to some chronic disease that has led to some event. 3% of healthcare dollars are spent on preventive care. So it's just designed, all incentives are aligned. The rails are driven in such a way that we're really, most of healthcare is designed for reactivity, react to some issue. And in between those visits, let's just say you have a primary care physician and you go once a year or you go every 6 months, which is pretty frequent for a primary care physician. And that's assuming you have one, by the way,
Mhm.
which a lot of people don't.
Right.
Um, so in between those 15 to 30 minutes a year, what is the interaction with healthcare that most of us have? None, unless you have a problem, right?
Mhm.
But that is the vast majority of the time in your life, and that's the vast majority of the and that's where chronic diseases really have the most impact, is in that time, right? And so, the what we see and what we see in our own sort of commercial activities, that the earliest, quickest, and fastest adopters are people, patients. They are the ones who want this information. They are the ones who want to be more empowered. They are the ones who really want to say, I want to be a more active participant. I'm not sure how to do that yet, but I want to be a more active participant. I want to be more empowered. I want to be more knowledgeable. And so that's sort of the need. And then I think digital health companies are trying to fill that need. And that's why you see so many of them are focused on patients primarily. Um, One, because they are the earliest sort of adopters and they're the most excited about new technologies that could potentially help them. And two, there's just less barriers to entry. And that's really where the tricks of working with healthcare systems and in a regulated space really becomes exceedingly cumbersome for early stage small companies that are trying to do something innovative. And so that's really sort of the balance that digital health companies have to strike, is that yes, you need to appeal to patients because that's your primary adopter, that's your primary sort of person who might interface with your product. But at the same time, to be legitimately seen by healthcare systems, you do need to go through those big hurdles of regulatory approvals, as well as interfacing with the healthcare system. Um, and so that's the struggle. And I think many digital health companies have done the former, interfacing with people, but haven't really pushed through the latter, which is much more difficult, costly, and challenging.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And having spent some time in that startup space myself, it is sort of a balance of, well, we really need to get revenue, but you have to get your regulatory clearance, right? And it
Yeah,
costs money to do those
yeah,
things.
yeah.
Were you involved in that, or does that happen before you joined Actia?
No, no,
Was it
I'm very much involved
there
in
in
the
it?
regulatory space as well as commercialization.
Ah, gotcha. Okay. So then has it been a challenge there, to have the company do that focus, or has that they were pretty on board with, nope, this is the regulatory pathway. We're going to go that way first.
So I think at Aktiia, no, we have, even before I came on in my role, there was always an acceptance and a knowledge that to really make an impact, the impact that we want to make, we will and have gone through our regulatory approvals in as many of the markets as we can. Um, it is also acknowledged that it is a tremendous amount of resources that are required to do that, and it's far easier to build a non-regulated product than it is a regulated product.
Right,
Um,
right.
but that's the reality of the world. And if you want to be a regulated medical device, there's nothing that's going to change in that regard. So I think it's just a matter of accepting that and being able to um, walk that sometimes tightrope between the two.
Definitely, definitely. Well, and yeah, certainly. Also, maybe helping a little bit is, as you said, it's patient demand, but we want our physicians to to get on board with that. Then there's a credibility that comes with it, as anybody who
Yeah.
knows anything about that process, right?
Yeah.
That the device has been through the rigors to
Right.
prove that it really is safe and effective. It's not just my Apple Watch telling me my blood pressure's high.
Right. That is the trick. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other hurdles to adoption by healthcare systems, but that is certainly one of the biggest.
So, to dive in a little bit more into your product specifically, is there a software component to the hardware? Does it integrate with other healthcare systems? Tell me about how the Actia device actually works for a patient.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the first thing is probably to sort of revisit for all the listeners, like how the fundamental sort of data capture that we take is blood pressure and heart rate measurements. Um, and we build a very complex data set around, based on those. But so it's important to kind of realize, like, where are we today with measurements of, let's say, blood pressure. Blood pressure for the last 50 years, you measure it with an upper arm cuff. People are probably generally familiar with that. They're sort of nearly ubiquitous technology. They've
Mhm.
existed, as I said, the technology is actually 110 years old, and it's really just automated 50 years ago, and it hasn't really changed since. You have to sit in a very prescribed position. You have to take it. You have to put your, self in a quiet place and, feet on the floor, back against the chair. You have to breathe for 5 minutes. can't have eaten or drank, you have to have an empty bladder, you have to have no clothing on your arm, you have to not children around. So all these things, right? That's how you take a blood pressure measurement, which in practice, who actually does that? I would challenge us. Even in physician's office, that's not happening generally.
No.
So, but that's how blood pressures are taken and have historically been taken. And one of the major gaps, another major gap in hypertension care is that generally there's just a lack of data to even look at because it's very difficult to get people to routinely measure their blood pressure. Um, and so, but that's the only technology we've had. And so you get these episodic readings occasionally. And so what you really get with that data, even if you get it, so generally many patients don't check their blood pressure at all. And so we really have no data and we're operating in a complete data vacuum as physicians and as we try to look at blood pressure and manage it. But even if you get some, remember that blood pressure is a continuously changing parameter. So your blood pressure fluctuates day in, day out, hour by hour, day by day. And what if you only take your blood pressure at one point in time? Then you're only getting that measurement at that one instant. And you don't really know what's happening the rest of the time. That's why all guidelines suggest that you have to take your blood pressure measurements very frequently, usually several times a day, or at least 2 times a day to even have a reasonable sense of your blood pressure patterns, which very few people do. So the co-founders at Aktiia developed a technology that works by optical sensors that are sort of worn on, using a device that's worn on the wrist like this one. And basically using those optical sensors, and there's a complex sort of algorithm behind it, which probably don't have enough time to explain in this point, but it's to basically deliver back blood pressure readings without you having to do anything. So all you have to do is wear it, and about 27 times a day, a blood pressure measurement will be taken, whether you're seated, standing, lying down, sitting, in any position other than exercise. We don't measure it when you're moving actively. So that gives people about 800 measurements a month, or 200 a week. And so you get a much clearer sense of overall patterns, trends, and you get this really nice complex data set. And then it allows you to actually get sort of feedback from your blood pressure. That's another gap that people have, is that we don't feel blood pressure. You don't know when it's higher. You don't know when it's better. You don't know when you're stressed and it's higher, or you've drank more alcohol and it's higher. You don't know any of those things because you can't feel it. So you can start to get these feedback loops that are built based on the readings to say, okay, my blood pressure, I went through dry January, let's say, and look at what happened with my blood pressure after that intervention. Or I started this exercise program and look at what happened over the next several weeks because I see this pattern changing. And so you can really get constant and continual feedback with your blood pressure based on like the sort of data set that we create. So that is the primary sort of core technology. And then around that, we wrap layers of software to start to allow people to say, not only annotate their data set, look at their interventions and see what happened. And then we're starting the process of actually partnering with research organizations and healthcare systems to start pulling in health outcome data into these patterns so that we can start to be even more predictive about what those patterns mean, what these specific blood pressure patterns mean, and why, as an example, 2 people would have a blood pressure of, let's say, 140 over 85 in my office at the same age. One of them has a stroke and dies at age 60, and the other one lives to 95. Why does that happen? We have currently no idea.
Yeah.
And so we can start to unlock some of those insights, hopefully from these blood pressure patterns, by collecting this sort of vast amount of data from different sources and really looking at it in a different way than historically has been done.
I love that. It's interesting. We've had a few other guests on the show along the way who are trying to do clinical things with mining lots of big data. And so,
Yeah.
there's a common theme there. And I love that because I do think I agree with you as far as putting the power back with the patient. The more we know, the better choices that we can make, hopefully. But at the same time, too, sometimes, blood pressure is an interesting one for sure because, you don't feel it I guess unless it's really, really high and you have like this massive pounding headache or something, right?
Yeah.
Then you
Even
are
then,
aware.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty rare that people actually feel it.
Interesting. All right. Well, switching gears just a little bit, if you could go back in time and tell yourself something at the start of your career, what would that be?
Take more risk. And I guess I've taken some, like even in a clinical context, like I trained at Mass General in Washington University, and then I went out and started my own practice. That was a risk, in a different way. Most of my mentors and people I knew were like, "Are you crazy? Why would you do that?" Because that was at the same time that the vast majority of physicians are joining employed groups and, you know, being part of larger healthcare systems. So what I did, it is an example, and I've done a couple other times, was joining Aktiia maybe as, after Mayo Clinic. Um, some people might see that as a sort of risky move, but the truth is that every time I've done that, I've learned so much and I've grown so much as a person, as a physician, as a father, as everything. I've just grown as a person, and um, I've never really regretted it, even if it didn't work out, even if the end result was not as favorable as I thought it could be or should be or might be. Um, I've I've only regretted the times when I've stayed too long in a certain place because it was safe. So
Yeah.
I would have told myself, take more risk, be a little bit more aggressive. Um, and in the end, I think don't the other part is that I don't look at any step of your journey as like useless or failing, or I should have done that differently. Or you could have said, well, maybe I could have done that differently. But the, but in my opinion, in my experience, that every step has led me to this point. And you've probably heard that a lot, but it's true. And it's just, there was nothing that I did that hasn't been used in some way, with what I'm doing now. And so I think those would be the two things that I would say to my younger self.
Yeah. I love that. Definitely. And I agree with that too, for sure. Last fun question for you. If I walked into a bookstore like Barnes and Noble, where would I find you?
Mysteries.
Mysteries. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Any
Got
mystery.
a
Uh,
favorite at this
well,
point or
and the classic Sherlock Holmes, the 2 volumes, that's really my favorite. Um, I will always love those stories, but yeah, that would be my yeah,
mysteries?
yeah.
Nice, nice. Sort of keeping in the theme with well, it's healthcare, right? It's a giant mystery to be solved.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jay. It's been a real pleasure. Where can folks go to learn more about Actia and connect with you?
sure. So on our website, www.actia.com, you can get on our website, you can see everything that's there, all our publications, the device, how it works, etc. Our story. But you can also sign up for updates as we push out new updates and new things. You can go all our social channels. It's for every website. It's or every social channel. It's at Actia Global. Um, and then on LinkedIn, you can always find me. I'm available on LinkedIn, and we can have those in the show notes probably. But those would be the places.
Great. All right. Well, thanks again. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you today.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It's great being here.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of From Lab to Launch, brought to you by Qualio. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and give the show a positive review. It really helps us out. For more information about Qualio, our guest today, or to be a guest on a future episode, please refer to the show notes. Until next time.